everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well,
Good.
doing well.
Yeah, lots of news.
Yeah, let's talk about our president. He was busy. You know, he does a lot of emailing. I don't know if you know tweeting all the time.
Yeah.
He does it all the time.
All the time, morning, noon, and night.
Do you tweet as often as he does?
Well, I used to before they kicked me off.
You know, Trump's really slipping. You'd think he'd qualify, but maybe that's what happens when you're a powerful president.
Yeah.
They can't push you around too much. He has an army behind him.
Yeah, literally.
Except, you know, being president and challenging a deep state is a rather dangerous position,
Yeah.
you know, overall, when you look at our history. Sometimes the deep state doesn't like an independent voice in the administration.
That's
Anyway,
for sure.
he got attention here. He had a neat little tweet, and he got our attention to what was going on here. And he brought up the subject of Fauci, his good friend Fauci. And matter of fact, he was, I think he was more or less making fun of him, you know, Fauci's baseball arm. You know. So I might just go ahead and read that, and then I'll get you to tell me what this all means. But this was, well, when I had this, it's within the last 24 hours, probably about 20 hours ago, this says. Let's see. The president returns to the campaign trail. Okay, here we go. Now, actually, here he says, Trump, actually, Tony's pitching arm is far more accurate than his prognostications. I wonder what he's referring to. I guess he didn't pitch in the major leagues, but he was pitching for the CDC all the time, and yet he didn't have a real good day pitching. And right now he's not very good on the prognostications, the predictions. And Trump goes on and makes a little bit of fun of that, which is probably about as good as you can do these days, make fun of them if they're a little silly. But unfortunately, Fauci still has bought into a lot of reputation with the support of Gates' money.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of people who think anything Fauci says is legitimate. But I thought maybe that was the direction Trump was going. But once again, it was an appointment which you think, well, why did he do it? And turns out he had to be best friends, and now he has to challenge him, and he never gets fired. Why don't you explain to our audience today, when you talk about this, why doesn't he ever get fired?
Well, he's been working for presidents since, 4 or 5 of the last presidents? You know, he's always been there. He's never treated a patient, but he's the greatest doctor in the history of the United States, depending on who you ask. But it really is interesting, Dr. Paul, to look at this. When we were talking before the show, you called it a divorce. It's kind of a divorce because Trump used Fauci at first to show how tough he was against the virus, and then, you know, to his credit, we always get in trouble when we praise Trump, but to his credit, he started to realize that things weren't all what they seem, that the lockdown was different. It was a political response to a medical situation. And I think that's when the break started. And Fauci, as you know, loves the headlines. If a couple of days pass without him being interviewed, he gets very nervous and very upset. So this whole latest blow-up between the two of them happened. First of all, Trump used Fauci in a campaign ad. And, you know, it was Fauci saying that I can't imagine anyone who could have done more to fight the virus than Trump. And they put that in there. Fauci was furious about that. That's not right. And so then Fauci, maybe as a retaliation, but he was, you know, Trump's rallies are the big thing. You know, people go to them. It's a big event. Fauci was quoted saying, you know, these Trump rallies, he's asking for trouble. We've seen when you have situations of congregant settings where there are a lot of people without masks, the data speak for themselves. So basically telling Trump, don't have a rally.
You know, I sort of like the way the president tweets, because he went on to say in this one that I mentioned before, WHO, no longer likes lockdowns. And we've talked about that. They've switched their position. And then just came out against. Trump was right. You know,
talks about himself.
Said, who's Trump talking about? Trump was who said? Oh, Trump said this.
Yeah.
Trump was right. We saved 2 million U.S. lives. Well, I think there's evidence now that more people died from the lockdown than from there. But I don't imagine, it might be a little bit of hyperbole, that they saved 2 million lives. But anyway, it gets their attention. And, if Trump were to happen to lose, which would be strange considering the conditions of this country and what is offered, but I imagine the media will go nuts.
Yeah.
Do you think the media will be hanging on every word of Biden?
Well, that'd be funny.
That would be pretty boring. But believe me, they have. If he wins, I'm sure his handlers have it all strategically planned out. They're not going to let him be out there because who knows? He might win this Senate seat after all.
Yeah, the second time he said, "I'm running for the Senate."
He's running for the Senate. So maybe that's a good place to put him.
It's probably a safer job. It's an easier job.
Right.
We have a couple. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit, but let's look at the first clip. This is what we were talking about. Trump rallies raise concern about spread of virus. Fauci says. But the next one now, we should look at the tweet, even though we've read it, because it's worth looking at. I laughed out loud. I sent it to you right away when I saw it this morning. Actually, Tony's pitching arm is far more accurate than his prognostication. You remember when he went and he threw out the opening pitch at that baseball game, where he and his couple of, I think it was his wife and his friend, were the only people in the whole stadium that took off their masks. Remember, he threw the ball and went wildly aside. So Trump, this is a classic Trump way of making fun of someone, making fun of the way they pitch. He's not a sportsman. He's kind of a wimp, and he's totally wrong. This is a really serious break, I think, between the two.
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging. And it is at a time when their arguments are falling apart. The people who want to have everybody wear the mask and follow through there. So Fauci's probably feeling some heat right now because he also made the statement. He's reassuring his supporters, and he has a lot of them.
He has a lot.
I'm not going anywhere. Now, I don't, regardless of what the election is going. He says, I plan to stay another 4 years.
Wow.
And I thought, well, who's his boss?
Yeah.
And I'm afraid it could be Bill Gates or somebody. So it looks like he will be around for a while because people do defer to him because for a long time he could say anything and everything, but right now he's being challenged and he'll get more careless and more angry as time goes on. But he still has done a lot of damage in a short period of time.
And this is the dream of his lifetime, to have a pandemic that he's sitting at the helm of, because throughout his career, if you look at his past, dealing with HIV/AIDS, he was trying to do the same thing. If you look at the 2009 flu, there's nothing he wants more than a pandemic because that gives the spotlight. But you're right, it would be hard to fire him because the CDC is sort of a quasi-government agency. You know, it's a so-called government agency, part of HHS, but it's also funded to a big degree by Big Pharma and by the Gates Foundation and others. So it's really one of those things. It's sort of like National Endowment for Democracy. They call themselves independent. They get some outside money. They get some government money. It's really the worst of both worlds.
You know, I think we sort of glided over this one issue that I want to re-mention again. Trump rallies raise concern. And of course, Fauci, they're not. That's their whole goal in life.
Yeah.
The rallies must drive them out of their minds. And I've said, and I believe it, that the incumbent president in a 4-year period has never exceeded anything near how many people that the president personally talked to, the rallies. That has to be huge compared to, some of the rallies. They didn't even do it that way.
Yeah.
So if that is any indication, politically speaking, he should be in good shape. But it's up for grabs. That's what I can see right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen in these next 2 weeks. But it just seems like the logic of it all is that the fact that they're attacking, Fauci says, these things are dangerous.
Yeah.
They're always so dangerous. It's the people, though, people who don't use masks and all, seems like they've gone along better than the ones who wore the mask.
Yeah.
There's no proof that the mask has done any good.
And we actually have a study that we'll talk about later that does that. But the thing about what Fauci said about the rallies, I read his typical quote. You can't understand what he's saying. But he's saying the data speak for themselves when you have people gathering without a mask. Well, actually, the data doesn't speak for itself because look at Sturgis, the big motorcycle rally, and they claimed, 250,000 people got the coronavirus because of it. That was a totally bogus, discredited, and even our good friend the governor of South Dakota said this is a bogus report, totally not true. And remember the White House event recently. Oh my gosh, Trump is killing everyone. Everyone got coronavirus at this event. Even Chris Christie, he's basically in the morgue anyway, and here he comes out of it just fine. And so they keep doing this. And remember when he had that exchange with Senator Paul, and for some bizarre reason said that he's telling Senator, the doctor, Paul, if you believe there's such a thing as crossover T-cell immunity, well, you're the only person who believes that, when he himself just a month earlier was talking about that exact thing. So this is a guy who really, he talk about a forked tongue. He speaks out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah, the rally thing is of interest, and I don't know whether it was today. I think it is today that Trump has 3 major rallies to attend in one day, wow. And I never quite had that experience. But it'll tell you what, to gear up. I thought, if I went out and talked 45 minutes to an hour. Well, first I got a little bored with my same old story.
Same old speech.
But to talk an hour takes a little bit of energy.
Yeah.
But he'll go longer than that, and to do that 2 or 3 times. But it shows that he's not eliminated yet from the political system, because we'll find out soon what's going to be happening on Election Day.
Yeah, and the polls, it reminds me of 2016, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I saw something this morning. Biden has a 91% chance of winning, according to some poll. I think with Hillary, she has a 112% chance of winning or something. And the polls are so notoriously wrong, and it's just like you can't trust anyone. But we have the next clip, and it's sort of a little out of, but we need to put it up anyway. And here's Trump. The World Health Organization came out a little while ago and admitted that Donald Trump was right. The lockdowns are doing tremendous damage to these Democrat-run states where they are in lockdown. Here's Trump calling himself in the third person. But it is true, and we talked about it yesterday. Unfortunately, he's only partly right in this, because there are some Republican-led states that are still not widely open, including one that we happen to be sitting in right now.
Right.
So it's not just that. So it's interesting, the breakaway, and let's look at the next one, because I think this is a bigger context. As you were talking about the election, and if we look at that next clip, this is from a little while ago. Remember, Biden says he'd lock the country down if the spread of coronavirus warranted it. So you're really seeing and we've talked about it before, you're really seeing a face-off now between those who want to lock things down and those who want to open things up. And I think that's becoming the defining characteristic of the campaign.
I think it is, and it shifted probably because a month ago I thought the only thing people would be talking about would be the riots in the cities.
Yeah.
And I still think that's going to be important for the people who can't shop anymore, and their stores have been burnt down, and there's been a lot of violence. But it's not the biggest thing in the news. It's this virus thing and lockdown. People are sick of the lockdown. Yeah. And people have short memories, and they can get stirred up rather fast. And you just may be right on this in the next 10 days, or how many days are left, that the people are going to see there's a definite difference. And I think Trump must sense this. I mean, he is bold right now that he's right and they're wrong, and then you have the opposition. Boy, it would really dispel my assumption at times when I say, well, long term, the parties are the same foreign policy, same monetary policy. Yeah. I like to spend money. But in this case, there is a difference.
It's emerging.
And that is the fact of about the lockdown, which is a liberty issue. I mean, people now do talk about, I have a right not, to go out. Why? How can they prohibit me from doing this? So I like this idea that they're talking about this being a basic liberty that it has been infringed upon.
And California is one of the worst lockdown states and the worst pro-mask states. They're just violent. I was talking to my dad yesterday. He went to the grocery store. He said, I got all the way to the front door and I realized I'd forgotten my mask. And I just was not about to go back to the car. So I walked in and did my shopping and bought everything, and I walked out and no one said a word. It's the first time he's ever done that. My dad, out in California. So maybe that's a good sign that even there people are like, we've had it.
And some people would go back and find a mask or something.
Yeah, and he was just grouchy. He didn't want to go out to his car.
Right.
But we want to talk about this Nevada situation, right?
Yeah. I'm very suspicious of this because they've talked about it for a long time, waiting for the day when they can scare people with saying, you can get this stuff twice.
Yeah.
And just from my general information and being around medicine a bit, it never sunk into me that we should be worrying about if a person was infected and got better and became immune, that they ever had to worry about being infected again. And of course, there's always some exceptions and all. But this one, they've been working on this. This was the first American. He was from Nevada, and but I think there's 4 or 5 around the world.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, if you read everybody that writes, especially those who are suspect about the reliability of the tests, you'd say the tests aren't reliable enough to do these measurements, just like the statistics aren't reliable enough to say, well, how many people got sick, how many cases were there, and then they come up with statistics that just sound horrible, horrible. At the same time, the real statistics of hospitalization and deaths continue to plummet, and yet they'll say, well, there are more cases than ever, and they'll misuse even the definition of cases, and if they increase the amount of testing, all of a sudden there's a lot more cases.
Yeah.
The world's coming apart. But this is something that they're reporting. I don't think anybody who reads this should get worried that all of a sudden, if they've been told, well, we had the virus, it's going to come back again, because I think the diagnosis has been a little bit confusing, and I understand that it's one article I read that they never get electron microscopic examinations of the virus.
Yeah.
A bacteria is a lot larger. So even in a little practice that I had a microscope, the old-fashioned way. And if I had to do a urine analysis and all this, I could look and I could see the bacteria. You can't do that with a virus, and unless you have an electron microscope. And now they're even saying what they're seeing. Nobody has really seen this virus.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. And this is still such a small number, and it's part of the struggle that keep people fearful and make them scared enough to let Fauci tell them what they can do to be safe.
I think it's so true. I think the catching it twice is the new case-demic, and you said it yourself. And they want to terrify people. And this is the 25-year-old Nevada man who supposedly, likely, caught it twice. There's a lot of qualifiers if you read the article, and we saw it on Zero Hedge, and we're not disparaging them, but if you look at, the problems with the accuracy of the PCR test, the fact that it, depending on how many cycles it goes, I'm not an expert in it, but it can catch tiny, tiny fragments of a virus, supposedly, and that will spew out a false positive. The New York Times itself, remember a month or so ago, said up to 90% of the tests are false positives. So you're right, it's meant to scare people, and it will be effectively used to scare people. You can catch it twice. Just because you're over with it doesn't mean you're done with it. You still can't go outside without your mask. And this plays right into Fauci's hands and right into the lockdowners' hands. And I think it's a pretty dangerous thing.
In general, our audience they have expressed themselves, on the internet for us about their reluctance to get in line immediately to get the vaccine. Some will, and everybody can make up their own mind. But they've already had a few setbacks. I think there's actually two companies now that had to pause what they were doing because of unexpected, unplanned, and unknown complications where people are getting sick before they even got the full test of the vaccine.
Yeah.
So this is a setback, but it's just another thing that the answers aren't in. And the people who are reluctant and not anxious to get that vaccine, I think it's a good thing that they have to think about it, especially now that the statistics showing how deadly the virus is, that, if you get it, that you're going to have a 90% chance of dying. No, you have a 99% chance you won't die.
Yeah.
Over 99%, you're not going to die from it. And so that why go looking for trouble? Because other vaccines have been known, do this. The big problem is people say, yeah, but what about this, and this? There have been some vaccines that have, helped people, and yet I don't think coronavirus is going to. As a matter of fact, from the very beginning, I have said, with the help of other people involved in this is they'll probably never have a true vaccine for coronavirus. I put it into the category of there will never be one vaccine for catching a cold, because the cold family is changing all the time. They come and go, and if you go 50 miles away, the cold virus is different, and I think that's probably what's going on. So this whole idea that, but the people have been conditioned. The Gateses of the world have conditioned people that this will be what is necessary for you to live a normal life. For you to get a job or go to college or get on an airplane, you will have to have the vaccine. Oh, you mean they're going to be checking just for the antibody? No, they're going to be checking for some other things, and it's going to be your passport. And that might, the whole mess that we've been going through for almost a year, that might be the scariest part about what's happening is the loss of privacy, and the whole idea that the government's going to have our passports put into our bodies.
And it literally is holding people hostage. It's literally, hey, do you want your life back? Do you want to stop being miserable? Do you want to go out and have a hamburger? Do you want to go have a glass of beer? Well, you better get your passport, and that's what they're doing. And when you see and I saw a doctor give a brilliant presentation on earlier today, but he said that the suicide rate has gone through the roof this year, more than people that have died of COVID. And so if you're on the verge of suicide and they say, hey, you can go back to normal if you get this injection, it really is, it's a crime, it's a war crime. But, as I think you would say, people should assess their own risk. If they feel comfortable taking the vaccine, if they feel like the benefits outweigh the risks, go for it. Feel free to do it.
Well, I think there's been a recent study, CDC may have been the one that reported this, that they have found out that the people who are frightened and they wear their masks, they follow all the rules, and then there are other people that are a little bit more independent, they're skeptical, and they don't wear their masks. Guess which group gets sickest the most? The people who wear the mask. That doesn't even count all the psychological, downturns, with people who, the kids and all, they don't even measure that, and they never dare measure the economic calamity of what's happened with the lockdown. But I was impressed with the idea. I thought maybe they'd at least be neutral, that it doesn't do any good, but it looks like, believe it or not, it looks like the mask may be doing more harm than just not wearing anything.
I mean, it's fascinating. We've been warned. We've had our hands slapped. You better be following the WHO and CDC, and we're doing our best now. We followed the WHO yesterday when they said no lockdowns. We're going to follow the CDC today because they did a study, and Jordan Schachtel wrote about it, and we saw his. And this is another one that we have up on the screen too, a separate discussion of it. But it's really interesting. They surveyed symptomatic COVID-19 patients and found that 70.6% of those symptomatic COVID said they always wore a mask. An additional 14.4% said they often wear a mask. So 85% of infected COVID-19 patients either always or almost always wear a mask, yet they have it. And only 3.9% of those that were infected in this CDC study said they never wear a mask.
This is a powerful message. And this is a trend. I would say that we recognize this and started talking about it. We always hoped for it, and we would have bits and pieces even months ago. But really, maybe in the last month, maybe even in the last 3 weeks, we've had much more evidence that the CDC starts coming out with stuff that we can quote. And I think that's a good sign. There were some days when I figured, well, we won't even ever move back in the direction of where we ought to be. At least now I'm hopeful that we better, because the alternative is that we're really in bad shape as a country. If they can do this to us and people just bow down and never question anything, we're in for a lot of mess. It's bad enough that we had to put up with this TST all this time, even though the threat of terrorists in our country has been greatly reduced. You still have the TSA. So And so maybe we'll see this turn, and maybe this would be a great thing in spite of all Trump's shortcomings. This would be great if he dated it, where he really puts out there and people start backing off. And if this works, he has just taken this issue where it was down here, because he hasn't always had exactly the same position all the time.
No.
But with this today, boy, I'll tell you what, that issue, and you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's up here someplace and might be a real defining moment with the election. But let's just hope that idea gets demolished with the election.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to close out if you think we're about done, and I'm going to, I like to point out absurdities. Let's put up this last clip. I couldn't resist putting this up, Dr. Paul. A woman in France can now be fined 165 euros for covering her face in public, whilst also being fined 135 euros for not covering her face in public. Because, they passed that law that the Muslim ladies can't cover their face. So you get fined if you cover your face, but you also get fined if you don't cover your face. So that's the insanity of the world we live in. I just want to do a periodic reminder. Please subscribe to our channel. We're growing in subscribers, but also go to ronpaulinstitute.org and subscribe there for free updates. Of course, we never sell or rent or give out your name, completely private with us. But we'll update you, and we'll send you special offers and things. So go ahead and please do that as well.
It reminds me of a little story, because a long time ago I read about Kentucky, that there were subsidies if you cut down trees and planted bluegrass. Bluegrass state, and this, they all wanted this bluegrass. But they also gave you subsidies for planting trees too. You could cut them down and you get a subsidy. You plant the grass. It's just sort of crazy. So, but that's we shouldn't be surprised about that. That's the way it works. And liberty is not complex. People are supposed to just have a right to their life and their liberty, and they have to accept one premise: you can't take the life or liberty away from anybody else. And guess what? What would happen? You'd have peace and prosperity around the world. And yet we have trouble selling this to people, because there's a group of people who are such determined to promote the issue of guns. That is government guns, because they feel strong and powerful and knowledgeable, and they know everything about vaccines, and if you don't obey, the government guns will come and take care of this. So this is the simple explanation of what liberty is all about is undermined by the people who are the authoritarians, and I call them gun people. And unfortunately, the gun people, the illegal, immoral gun people, are the ones who are in the government. And when you talk about it, if you look at all of history, it's the big guns that are used, and because it's never the kids that have to go off and fight the wars. It's always they have to go off and fight the wars. It's not the elderly who vote for this stuff. And they're the ones who have the guns. But it is such a shame that we can't have a better understanding. And I place a lot of blame, in the times that we live in, and certainly our educational monopoly by our government has given us a great deal of grief. But I tell you what, we still have our program going. We get challenged at times, and there's the original founders of this country did some pamphlets, and they passed them out and figured, how can they reach all those people? They didn't even have the internet and all this. They had pamphlets, and they passed them around, and they changed people's attitudes. And I think that's what has to happen. Everybody should be a pamphleteer and getting information out, and just get the message. It's simple and clear. It's moral and correct. It's American, and it's such a good way to have prosperity and peace. And how can you argue about this? So I always wonder, why do we fail so miserably with such a wonderful message? And yet we do. We let the people come and let the demagogues run the world and tell us what to do. And people, unfortunately, have been taught they want to be safe and secure, and governments promises safety and security, and all of a sudden people say, well, giving up some liberty is okay. Under bad conditions, you always have to give up liberty in order to be safe and secure. And I say, no, you don't have to. You have nothing less. If you start giving up a little bit of liberty for a little bit of security, you don't end up very well. So we need to reverse that and make the trend go in a different direction. That is, restore liberty and restore prosperity and peace in the world. And that is why we have the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, with a firm belief that if we followed the rules of liberty, the whole world would be better off. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.